Hello and welcome to episode 13 of What's Tom Reading. I'm Tom, and today I'm talking about the book Spycraft, The Secret History of the CIA's Spy Techs from Communism to Al-Qaeda by Robert Wallace and H. Melton. This book is all about the awesome agents, gadgets, and gear used by the CIA to spy on America's enemies. If you're interested in hearing some real-life James Bond stuff, then you are going to love this one. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the show. All right, so as I said, today we are talking about the book Spycraft by Robert Wallace and H. Melton. I wanted to say first of all, I wanted to apologize for the big gap between episodes here. If you're listening to them kind of as they're coming out, you will have noticed that there was a significant gap between episode 12 and episode 13. That is just because of the Thanksgiving break. I'm also working on finishing up some big projects for the semester. We're coming up into the final season, so I'm getting ready for final exams as well. So I have been busier than normal. Did a lot of traveling for Thanksgiving, which was awesome. Ate a lot of delicious food and got to spend time with family, which, I hope you guys all had a wonderful and happy Thanksgiving as well. But it did cut a lot into my normal reading schedule and my normal production schedule for getting these episodes out. So I apologize for that. And we'll just return to our I guess as close to normal of a schedule as I can going forward. I guess we can expect that I'll also have delays around Christmas time probably, but other than that, I should be good to go from here forward. Thank you guys so much. I've been getting a lot of kind feedback from you guys out there who are listening to this, and I really appreciate it. It's kind of weird to be sitting here in my space and time, talking essentially to the wall in my back room here in my apartment, and that at some future time, some unknown person is going to listen to what I'm saying. It's kind of an interesting experience to be able to record this. If you've never done anything like this, then you probably can't relate. But for those of you who have, I guess it's something that I'm still adjusting to, something that I'm still getting used to. So, but I've gotten some good feedback on different things that I can do to kind of improve the show, and I'm going to try to implement those as I go. So it benefits everybody, right? If I can make this a little bit better in the pacing or in the quality or things like that I can do. If it's not your thing at all, then right, you just won't listen to it. And so, but if you're here and you're listening to it, then you must be getting something out of it. If you feel like there's a way that I could improve it so that you get more out of it, please let me know. I want to be able to do that. This whole experiment doesn't really have that much of a purpose if I'm just recording things, putting them out into the world, and nobody cares or listens. So, but fortunately, that's not the case. I've had lots of great feedback from a lot of you guys. The show is growing. These types of things are always difficult, I've found, to get off of the ground. But we are into the hundreds of listens now, which is just awesome. I didn't anticipate that it would be able to grow as quickly as it is even. And so for those of you who are listening and have reviewed it and shared it and things like that, I sincerely appreciate you guys. You are so awesome. And I'm loving it. So I guess that's the housekeeping, and we'll move on to the main event here. And this book is Spycraft, and it's awesome. In fact, it's so awesome that I recommend that you go out and get it, because it was like a tome. It was full of tons of information, and I'm going to have to like just buzz over the top of it, like kind of a flyby, 1,000 miles up kind of thing, on how I handle this book, because there's so much information. It's a book literally about information. So it's like it's packed, and there's no way that I could possibly do it justice. So if you're interested in it, I'm going to give you kind of a teaser here about what it's sort of about. But if you're interested, there's no substitute in this case for you going out and getting it yourself and reading it. If you're interested in espionage or spycraft or any of like the information gathering techniques that are going on around the world, intelligence, things like that. If you're interested, I highly recommend this book. It's full of just some incredible stories. And what's super cool about it is usually when I talk about a book, I talk about the authors, right? In this case, it's Robert Wallace and H. Keith Melton. And there's a large foreword at the beginning of the book kind of describing what it is that made these authors want to write this book. And so I'm not going to talk that much about the authors at all. There is information available about them, of course, but I think it would be much more in keeping with the spirit of the novel and also much more mysterious if we just referred to them, and this is true, but we refer to them as former associates of the CIA, and that anything else you might want to know about them is strictly classified. It's not necessarily true, but it's on theme. And so that's what we're going to go with. If you want to learn more about the authors, then I guess Google it. But basically, the reason that this book was made was that some friends of the authors who participated in the clandestine arts back in the day, they expressed some disappointment that so many of the cool things that they had done and made and built and experienced during, particularly during the Cold War, the spy wars going on behind the scenes there, so many of those things that they had done were just going to fade away into history without the story ever being told. So I guess fearing that those heroics and the genius and a lot of cool people who worked hard to save the world, right? At least they thought so at the time. And I think so as well. They worked hard to, stay one step ahead of the Soviets in the USSR during the Cold War. And who knows what kind of a world we'd be living in if we weren't able to maintain that edge. So I think that this book has a really important place in our own history, as well as, in world history, even, as well as just being super cool and interesting. So the authors, they get to work compiling a lot of information. They file some Freedom of Information Acts. They deal with, former agents. And when they presented the transcript of the finished book to the censors, the holy, sacred, on high censors who decide whether things can be said or not, the censors returned with a prohibition on publishing the book because they said that basically it contained too much information about the craft employed by the CIA. And so they redacted large sections of it. And then eventually they said, because of the collection of all of these things into one place, this book represents too much of a material breach in CIA protocols. And it's classified. You can't talk about it. And so that shows you a lot about the authenticity of this book, right? Because they almost couldn't publish it, right? But eventually, they pull some strings, they threaten some lawsuits, they, go through the typical government channels, speak to a judge and all this stuff. Eventually, the book is cleared for publication and you get Spycraft, which, with a background like that, right? If you're writing a book on spycraft and the government doesn't want you to publish it because there's too much sensitive information in it, that should let you know that you want to get this book, right? This was, it was awesome, exciting, pretty much all the way through. There were some parts that were a little slower, mostly because they didn't really play to my interests as much. But for the most part, the whole thing was just super interesting. The authors obviously know just a ton about the craft. And there were times when I was reading along and I was actually genuinely surprised that the authors and, the CIA would allow them to. I guess they didn't really have a choice after, they went to the judge or whatever. But I was genuinely surprised that the authors would so freely include some super cool ways of spying in this book that I was like, oh, wow, that, as I read it, I was like, that feels like sensitive information. So one thing is for sure, right? If the judge, the administrative hearing or whatever, and the CIA and everyone else involved, if they eventually allowed these guys to publish this book, then that the tricks and tools that they're using right now, like the modern stuff, must be just so far out of the league of even this super cool tech in the book that they're talking about that they feel confident in letting these secrets out. So I love this book. You need to get it. You need to read it. If you're interested in espionage or like James Bond movies or Jason Bourne films and stuff like that, this is definitely going to be up your alley. So one of the big themes, obviously, of this book is sort of the relationship between the United States and the USSR during the Cold War. In fact, the CIA basically exists in its current iteration because of the Cold War and the need to keep up like a spy network against the Soviets. And American agents were able to go to Moscow during the Cold War, because that's one thing that I've always wondered, like how were the Russians able to spy so much in the United States? How were the Americans able to spy so much in the USSR? Like, wouldn't it be pretty obvious if you're like, you fly in there and you're not a Russian and you're just like pretty noticeably an American? Wouldn't they just like know that you were a spy? So I've wondered about that. But basically, American agents were able to fly into Moscow under the cover of being staff members at like an agency there, or like at some like legitimate reason that the U.S. had for having Americans in Moscow. They would have American CIA agents kind of planted, sprinkled in among that group there. And the purpose that group served was legitimate enough that even if a few CIA agents were found among them, the Russians wouldn't just throw the whole embassy out, right? Like embassies serve a very important role in diplomatic relations, particularly during times of tension between two countries. And the same was true vice versa, right? There were Russian nationals in the United States who had jobs at Russian embassies. And so, and they also had the KGB is sort of the CIA equivalent from this time period. And so, the legitimate cover for all these agents was that they worked for like an embassy, or they were contractors or something like that. There's some reason why they were there legitimately. And then the CIA would have them do a little bit of espionage on the side. What's interesting, though, is that these spies mostly relied on source information gathered from other assets, and those other assets are referred to as agents. And those agents are like, so if the Americans were spying in Russia, all of the agents were typically like Russian, like what's the right word? I guess from their perspective, traitors, right? Like Russian spies, Russian agents, double agents, or whatever, who we call them defectors, right? They defected over to the United States side in exchange for money and a promise of relocation for them and their family and things like that. A lot of these people really didn't want to be in the USSR because, and like, I don't want to violate any of your expectations that I be neutral about this, but I'm going to go ahead and do so right from the beginning. In this particular instance, the U.S. is definitely the good guys and the USSR are definitely the bad guys, right? So like, and the reason you know that is because most of the people who worked for the CIA from Russia were desperate to get out of Russia because they feared the Russian totalitarian regime there, right? And that was a big advantage that the KGB actually had over the CIA, is that like they didn't even really, because they're a totalitarian state, they don't even really have to have much of a pretense for locking up their own citizens. And so if someone was suspected of spying, it was like, boom, right to gulag, right? Like you talk to an American on the bus, maybe you're not a spy, but you just happen to accidentally talk to an American, boom, right to gulag. We're not even going to take a risk on you, right? You have no rights, you have no due process, no anything like that. So boom, there you go. And this actually made operating in Russia pretty difficult for the CIA. So that was an advantage that the Russians had because of their totalitarian regime. They also, I mean, just on paper, right? We talked in a previous episode about the Ukrainian famine where millions of people starved to death, right? The Soviet Union, the USSR, Russia, right? These are kind of interchangeable terms for the same kind of area, entity, I guess. They're just not, they're not a great place to live, right? It's poor. It's economically downtrodden. There's just massive amounts of violence and authoritarianism being used by the government against the people. If you speak out in any way, you get sent to gulag. You like work in a salt mine until you're dead, basically, is the way that it ends up shaking out. And so Russians, they found a lot more ease in contacting American defectors in some ways, because all they had to do was like go to like some university, and some professor who thought they knew better about how the world should run would be like, yes, I'm on your side, and so I'll pass you information. So in some ways, the KGB had the advantage, right? Because they were willing to do basically anything in order to accomplish their goals. And so what's interesting as well is like if you caught an American asset, excuse me, if you can hear my daughter crying, she's as of this recording, it's 1:15 in the morning, and we're trying to get her to go back to bed. She's not having a good time of it. So and the time that I'm recording this should tell you something about my schedule right now, working on projects and finals and things. I am burning the midnight oil, so to speak. So but yeah, baby's not having a great time right now, so apologies if you can hear her in the background. But as I was saying, if one of these Americans who's undercover working for an embassy, if one of them ends up being caught by the KGB or something, it's not like they would like put them up against the wall and shoot them. They would just blacklist them and deport them, send them out of the country, and they were not allowed to re-enter. And they basically were burned, right, as an agent. The CIA couldn't use them in the USSR again, but at least they weren't like killed. And the same was true of like KGB agents who were discovered in the United States. They would just like catch them, blacklist them, and send them away back to Russia or whatever. And the reason that they did this was they had this sort of gentleman's agreement with each other that they wouldn't just start killing each other's agents. Obviously, they were trying to avoid a huge war at the time, a huge nuclear war at the time with each other. And so they didn't want to create too many sparks in the powder keg environment by just starting to execute each other. But what happened that's actually pretty cool is if you're an American and the KGB suspects you in Russia, then their surveillance of you can get pretty aggressive, pretty mean, right? They'll start sending you messages. They do this thing that's called like bumper locking. So they'll like follow you so close in your car and like actually like bump into the back of you, right? And like, or they'll like literally like your KGB handler will just like walk exactly beside you and like not let you out of his sight just to intimidate you, right? Like he'll walk like maybe like one step behind you or like right beside you everywhere you go, so that you know like, hey, we're watching you and we're not down with what you're doing. There was some petty vandalism, right? Taking tires off of their cars, removing batteries. But like as a general rule, they didn't touch each other. It's kind of an interesting dynamics that the KGB and the CIA had, where they had this agreement, sort of like as a small microcosm of the entire Cold War as a whole. They had this like ceasefire understanding that like, we don't touch each other directly. We'll like do whatever we can to foil each other. And we'll even like use third parties to like kill each other. But as far as like our like agent on agent relationship, like there's going to be no shots fired there. But like, we know you're up to something. We don't like it. If we find the people you're talking to, those people are going to be killed. Right. And so basically the CIA's main thing. And what another cool thing is, if they're doing like, so this is overt surveillance, right? The bumper locking, the walking side by side, the car tailing them from some distance, right? But then the KGB, they were clever, right? And that's one thing that like during this showdown between the CIA and the KGB, it becomes clear pretty quickly within about 10, 15 years of the Cold War starting. The Cold War starts basically in the late 40s, early 50s, and goes on until the 90s, right? And at first they had some parity with each other. They were like, the CIA and the KGB, there wasn't that much distance between their capabilities. But over about 10 or 15 years, the CIA begins to have just a massive advantage in technological like ability. They're just so much better than the KGB that it's not even funny. But the KGB, there are, highly intelligent, highly motivated, highly dedicated to their cause, and they're smart. And so one of the things that they do in order to try and trip up these agents, these American assets, CIA agents, in the field, is they would perform this overt surveillance where they're tailing them, they're following them, from some distance in a car or something like that. And then they would also perform covert surveillance, where it's basically being covered by the overt surveillance. So the agent thinks that he's lost his tail. He performs a surveillance evasion run, which basically, if you ever feel like you're being followed and you want to like figure out whether you're being followed, the general rule is double back on yourself. And then if you double back on yourself multiple times and the same people are still behind you, then yeah, you're being followed, right? So, double back, take three right-hand turns in a row or something like that, something that no one would organically do. And if the person behind you is still behind you, then yeah, you're being followed. That's a basic surveillance evasion technique. Like the most basic one that you could really do. Hopefully you aren't being followed, but like that's something that you could maybe consider doing. Basically though, once these CIA agents felt like they had lost their tail, they'd done a successful surveillance evasion run, and then their handlers have to like break off or whatever because they don't want to like give away the game if they're following them. These guys would be like, okay, I'm free. I'm ready to go about my mission. But the KGB, being crafty, they actually had somebody who was even sneakier spying on them as well. So now that they feel like they've lost their tail, they go directly to their agent, and the KGB is able to follow them, find the person that they're talking to, and destroy them. And that's one thing that's also super interesting about the way that the KGB handle themselves is that they're just ruthless. There's one officer. He was actually an officer in the KGB who defected to the United States, and he provided a whole bunch of information to the CIA. Eventually, he's betrayed by, a guy named Aldrich Ames, who's a scumbag. He's actually still alive. He's in prison in Indiana and will never, ever get out. I think he's like 80 years old now. But yeah, he's never going to see the light of day again because he was a way big traitor and he got a lot of good people killed for money, which sucks. And I'm not even going to really talk about him that much other than just say that he's a piece of crap. If you're interested, Aldrich Ames is his name, and he has kind of an interesting story. I read about it on Wikipedia, but I wanted to talk about him a little bit during this episode, but I was like, you know what? I don't have time for that kind of guy, right? Because he got like good people killed, and that really actually does suck a lot. And one of the people that he got killed was this KGB officer who had been handing off secrets to the CIA. Once the KGB found out through the traitor, they took this guy, and the rumor that got back to the CIA about what happened to this guy is that he was cremated alive, and that the whole thing was videotaped and showed to new KGB agents to show them what happens if you go behind our back and work with the CIA, right? That's kind of how the KGB had to respond to being at a technical disadvantage to the CIA. They had to be like, we are freaking in this, and traitors will be burned alive, right? And it's interesting because so like the KGB, if they find a Russian citizen who's working with the CIA, that person is almost always just executed. There's like a show trial. The newspapers over there, Pravda, picks it up and talks about it, and they talk about how this person's a traitor to the cause and blah blah blah, and then they're put against a wall and shot. Basically, if in the United States an American defects and starts passing secrets to the Russians, then that person is just put in jail. Right. So the stakes are much higher for Russians to pass information to Americans than they are for Americans to pass information to Russians. So basically, America's home front is less secure, partially because, we have a lot more freedom here, and people are free to do what they want and associate with who they want, largely, especially back in like, the 50s and 60s. And so, the CIA has a hard time plugging leaks. Like I said, there were just like the groups of academics who thought that, communism was a super sweet idea, presumably because they thought that they would be in charge in that system. And people who are arrogant always think that they'd be awesome at running a country, even though they invariably prove not to be. So, but yeah, there was no shortage of like hoity-toity, rich, white New England intellectuals who were willing to, betray their country in exchange for some sweet, sweet rubles and a chance at being head honcho of their own little communist district sometime in the future, perhaps. Anyways, I'm going too far on this one, perhaps, but basically, as the Cold War progresses, let me shift gears here. As the Cold War progresses, the United States begins to rely more and more on technology rather than because when they were relying on agents, they had to meet, face to face in darkened alleyways, and the KGB would bust up the meetings and find the assets, find the defectors, and put them against the wall and shoot them. And so this was risky. And word was getting around about how risky it was. And so their intelligence gathering efforts were a lot less profitable because there were fewer and fewer people who wanted to come forward and work with the CIA. But as technology progresses, the CIA is able to deploy just these amazing tools that give them such an advantage in intelligence collection that the USSR reports from that time period, basically all of them seem super surprised every time they learn about what the CIA is capable of. And they're like, yeah, so for the last couple of years, they've been doing this and we had no idea. And they learned tons and tons and tons of our secrets. And yeah, it's a bummer because we didn't even know that it was happening. We had no idea that this technology was even possible. A good example is well, actually, I'm going to save it for the science corner because this is one of the coolest things I've ever heard of as far as technology. But so even the more primitive tech gear, right, from the 60s and 70s and 80s, this is the time period where they start to be able to miniaturize things. They use what's called one-time pads, which those date back even to World War II, right, where there's a cipher and there's only 2 copies of the cipher that are made, and the way that you create these ciphers is it's a random assortment, random jumble of letters and numbers, and the two code books are identical. This random assortment would be A equals 3 and B equals Z and C equals I, and just a total you just randomly pair up all of these different numerals, and you only print 2 pads, and they're called one-time pads because they only can be used once. But what's interesting is that they're not actually a cipher. They can't actually be broken. What they are is they're a type of encryption where as long as the numbers and letters are truly randomized, there's literally no way that you can break the code contained in a one-time pad, even today, right? It's this because there's no grammar to it. There's no logic to it. There's no there's sometimes repeating numbers. If you tried to spell the word I don't know, feet or something like that, then it would be I don't even know, C114 or something like that. And the 11 would be the repeating EE, right? There's some of that, so they can kind of infer that 11 might mean E in this case. But even if they worked super hard to crack this one code, it's only the one code from the one-time pad. Right. And one-time pads, you can make one of those, right? If you ever have to covertly communicate with someone for some reason, I can't imagine what reason you would have to do that. But basically a one-time pad is an unbreakable code, even today. So they had those. They also had they would do dead drops is a very common thing. It's actually still a common thing where although it's a lot more techie now, but there have been dead drops used all throughout the Cold War where basically you would go to a random area on a construction site, and the CIA would make a hollowed out brick for you to put some folded up intelligence into. You'd fold it up, put it in there, and then you put a chalk mark on the wall outside the construction site to let your handler know that you have dropped something off. Your handler walks by there later on in the day, maybe a couple days later or whatever, sees the chalk mark, walks into the dead drop, opens up the hollow brick, pulls out your intel, and boom, Bob's your uncle. Maybe he leaves a little something for you as well, some cash or some further instructions, whatever. That's a dead drop, and it's been used. It was used all throughout the Cold War and had varying levels of sophistication. And it's actually still used today. Not that long ago, the Russians photographed a couple of British people who were working at the British Embassy in Moscow who went out to a rock and were like it was just a rock beside the road, but they were like fiddling with the rock and trying to change batteries inside of this rock that actually contained a bunch of high-tech gear. And what's cool is that it has like a Bluetooth receiver in it. And then the agent, he can just like put all of his data onto his phone, and then he fires up the Bluetooth signal. And then as he drives past this rock at the side of the road, even while the car is moving, it connects, transmits all of the data over, transmits the instructions back over, boom, boom. They don't even have to slow down as they're driving past it. So that's like that's how sophisticated and cool dead drops have gotten now. But the Russians found one somehow. They actually found 2 of them, and the British ended up having some egg on their face there as they were caught trying to change the batteries. Basically, the Russians they found the rock somehow. They sabotaged it so that the British would have to come out to it. And then they followed a couple of British embassy workers out to the rock. And like, ha, gotcha, spies. Get out of here, you dirty spies. They were blacklisted and sent back to the UK and the United Kingdom's intelligence gathering service. They were, I think, probably pretty embarrassed because the Brits are phenomenal intelligence gatherers. They're among the best in the world. And so, and they share a lot of their tricks with us. Not all, they have their own and we have our own, but they have been a friendly power for many, 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 many decades now. So, as I said, technology progresses and it gets so sophisticated that we start using like radar and lasers and spy satellites and then eventually the internet comes along, which changes everything. Like all the rules of spying now are different because the internet exists and you can use like a VPN or a VoIP or like all these different things to encrypt your conversations and your emails and all this stuff. And so the internet has changed the game again on the spying. And we live in an era, and I think that's why this book was able to be written, basically, is we now live in an era where all of those more primitive methods for gathering information have basically become kind of like useless because everything is recorded on the internet now. And so if you can find some kind of a way to get somebody's phone to record their conversation and then send you the conversation, that's obviously better than putting some real live agent in danger and then having them record it and then come meet you or like go to a dead drop, right? Spies are actually a lot safer now as long as they're able to use the internet. And as long as they're like not caught with incriminating software, then it's much more difficult to find a spy. And the interesting thing about all of this is that the spying hasn't stopped. It's still on. The CIA and the KGB, well, not the KGB. It's like I think they're the FSB now. I think that's what they're called. But yeah, the CIA and other foreign intelligence services, China's intelligence service and Cuba's intelligence service, they are young and Cubans apparently have like a pretty powerful little intelligence service, young and scrappy and very dedicated. So this is still an ongoing concern here. The intelligence, the spying, all this stuff is still happening right now as we speak. It's just changed. But the history of this and how like all the gadgets they've made, as I said, I knew going into this that I wouldn't be able to do it justice because there are hundreds of gadgets that are talked about in great detail in the book. Microdots, that's another one that I really like, where they print a bunch of text in like the tiniest little dot, and the dot is hidden somewhere inside of another letter. And the way that you find it's hard. They're actually hard enough to find that they were actually borderline useless. But you find this microdot, you put it under a high-powered microscope, and then there's a message in it, right? Like that's super cool stuff. It's basically spy stuff, it's real life spy stuff, but so much of it's in movies now that I'm like, oh man, like they must have consulted with some people on this one. Anyways, I feel like I would just be like doing it further injustice if I started to try and like take like 10 seconds to talk about 10 seconds at a time to talk about a gadget. You really should just go and get this book. And if you want to go get the book, as always, the link there will be a link in the description that will allow you to go through. You can pick it up on Amazon, Audible as well. If you click through that link and buy it on Audible, then you'll be able to support the podcast without any additional cost to you, because I will get an affiliate. It's an affiliate link. So Amazon will give me a few pennies for sending you over there, which will be awesome for me. And the book will be awesome for you. And Amazon will sell a book. And so it's win-win-win all around. And if you are interested in doing that, please feel free to do so. I'm ready to move over to the science corner, and I'm excited about this one. Let's go. All right, so welcome to the Science Corner. Today, we're talking about a super cool gadget that was mentioned in the book that I think is the existence of this gadget is bananas. It's so science fiction to me that like I almost can't even believe that it exists. But it totally exists, and it's called a laser microphone, and it's a surveillance device. Obviously, it's a piece of spy gear, and it uses a laser beam. It shoots this laser beam across up to 400 meters, and you shoot it at a window where a conversation is happening. You can also shoot it through a window if you calibrate it correctly, through a window at like a picture on a wall, or a vase on a desk, or a vase, depending on your proclivity on that particular inanimate object. But it shoots through the window at some inanimate, smooth surfaced object, and then the laser bounces back to the device that has like a collection plate on it. That signal is returned to the machine, again, up to 400 meters away. And the slight microscopic variations in that laser signal caused by the object in the room's vibrations as it is subjected to the sound waves of the occupants' voices, that allows spy people to listen in on a conversation from 400 meters away through a window, and some people think through walls as well. That's nuts. From 400 meters away, that is a quarter of a mile. From a quarter of a mile away, they can shoot a laser through your window or through your wall and bounce it off of your laptop screen, or like a picture on your wall, or a vase on your bookshelf, or something like that. And that picture or vase, or even the window itself, right? Because if you're speaking in a room, your sound waves are hitting the window. Those sound waves, those sound vibrations that are coming out as a wave from your voice and from the voice of the other person in the room that you're having a conversation with, those sound waves are detectable when they're picked up from the object that's vibrating ever so slightly, microscopically. The laser picks that up, and a highly sophisticated piece of software converts that back into audio, and literally they're able to listen to your conversation using a laser that's undetectable, by the way. A microscopic, invisible laser shot at your window from a quarter mile away can hear your conversation. Do you feel safe? Do you feel like your conversations are maybe being listened to? There's no way you could possibly know, right? Is there an area within a quarter of a mile that has access to your window? If so, then someone could be listening to everything you say. How crazy is that? There was also, I was just reading, there's a patent filed for a laser that can do this off of ephemeral surfaces. It's particularly well suited to capturing vibrations that pass through smoke or fog or mist, right? So the laser just shoots through free air and is able to pick up a conversation. That's bananas. That's actual bananas. Like, it feels sci-fi. It feels fake, but it's not. This has been the Science Corner. Let's take it down a notch and move over to the History Corner. All right. Welcome to the History Corner. I feel a lot safer and more comfortable talking about things that happened a long time ago rather than high-tech lasers shooting through my window and spying on my conversations. So for this one, we're going back to the American Revolutionary War. We're talking about the famous and infamous traitor Benedict Arnold. And you've probably heard that name before if you are an American. And basically, he was a traitor. He was a traitor to the revolutionary cause. He joined the British, sabotaged the Americans, fought on behalf of the British, turned over an important fort, and then skedaddled over to England for the rest of his days. What's interesting to me, and because I was thinking, what can I talk about when we're dealing with espionage and treason and things like that? What's interesting to me about Benedict Arnold is I've always heard it said in America that he went back to Britain a hero. Like he was a hero of the British Empire, and they loved him and they respected him, and they gave him high honors, and there are statues of him all over the place. Not so, actually. In fact, the British kind of looked at what he did as really sort of scummy and ungentlemanly. And they're like, thanks for joining the cause or whatever. But when he went over, he wanted to be like a British military officer, and so he's like, yeah, give me a commission. And they're like, yeah, bro, we are obviously not going to put you in charge of anything, right? Because you have the heart of a coward and traitor, right? They actually had more respect for American officers who held to their own cause, and British papers start to smear Arnold as like a mercenary and a dirtbag. And so that was heartening to me. It goes back to a time where even though the Revolutionary War was bitterly fought and a lot of people died, there was still an element of gentlemanly conduct there between the British and the Americans. And even Benedict Arnold, even though he helped out the British and he betrayed the Americans, he did not go on to be super well received in Britain because you don't have any honor, and so we're not putting you in charge of anything, and also we think you're gross. So anyways, this has been the History Corner. Let's move over to the Random Corner. Okay, welcome to the Random Corner, and I'm going to go from spooky laser thing to relatively benign sounding, talk about history to back to spooky again, right? The Random Corner, we're talking about something called Havana syndrome. If you haven't heard about this, hear about it now and do some research, because this is ongoing as we speak. We do not know what causes Havana syndrome. And like I said, the Cuban intelligence service, they're young and plucky. This, we think, is probably the Russians, but basically what's happening is there's a set of U.S. diplomats, when we say U.S. diplomats, according to the book, right, we know when we're talking about diplomats, we're also talking about spies, right? There's unfortunately, and I don't want to smear any diplomats or anything, but a lot of times there are some CIA assets kind of sprinkled in with our embassies around the world. And maybe that's not fair to the diplomats themselves because they might not know. But basically, our intelligence services have a history of implanting with embassies. So when they say this is affecting diplomats, maybe it's targeted at spies. And there's some evidence that it actually is, because some people who were undercover ended up coming down with Havana syndrome. But basically, it's this set of symptoms, and we don't know what causes it, but all of a sudden these people, these agents, will hear a sudden loud noise. There'll be pain in their head, pressure in their head, vibrations, ears ringing. Their vision will go weird. They'll have vertigo, nausea. They'll have brain problems, cognitive problems, and they'll get super dizzy. And then all of a sudden, boom, it'll stop. And we don't know what's causing it. There's the conclusion is that there's some sort of a microwave device being used directed at them to try and do something. Maybe, I don't know. We don't know. We don't know anything about it. This is spooky though, because some of our undercover spies all of a sudden come down with Havana syndrome, start hearing loud ringing noises, pain in their head, fall down to the ground, puking, cognitive difficulties, and then boom, it stops. And they get up and they go about their day having been attacked by something, and we don't know what. This is happening right now. Spooky spy stuff, you guys. This has been the Random Corner. Let's get back to the main review. Okay, we are back to the main review, and I'm spooked. Are you spooked? We are all spooked. That's why they call them spooks. They can spy on you. They can hear you. Maybe they can hear me right now. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe there's a laser pointed at me. Who knows? We live in interesting times where you can be surveilled in lots of different and interesting ways, and in ways that we probably haven't even heard of, right? That's the thing that kind of spooks me the most is the fact that this laser microphone technology exists and that we know about it means that there's probably something better and cooler out there, which is, it's scary. It's scary to think about how easy it is to be surveilled in this modern era of technology. You really can't hide anything. So don't try. Right. And hopefully you're never put in a position where you are forced to have to try. And that's why I think we should not play with fire as far as giving the government too much power over our lives, because, you know, they can shoot lasers into your room and hear you talking bad about the king or the emperor or whatever they call themselves. And that could be it. You could be off to Gulag, to the salt mines. So this book was awesome. You have to get it. There's not really anything that I didn't like about it. Like I said, there was a few times where the pacing got a little bit slow for me. But then it picked right back up with like a car chase scene with like a couple of cool agents who you're really invested in, and they do some really cool stuff. And like, it's awesome. The whole thing's awesome. Go get it. If you want to get it, the link is in the description. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to give you the rating of the bells for this book. That's right. This is a 4-bell book here, not stars. This is a 4-bell book. I loved it. It was really interesting, super fascinating. Part of the reason that this gets 4 stars from me is that it had so much information in it. I read these books to learn, and I learned a ton from this. I was also highly entertained. This was the double whammy for me. So it was a nonfiction book that I also was able to get a huge amount of entertainment out of. The narrative of the story is actually pretty good, considering that it has to cover such a vast swath of time and a large array of different people and characters and gadgets and things like that. You know, it felt like it flowed actually pretty nicely. So highly recommend it. Go out and pick it up. There wasn't really anything that stood out that I didn't like about this book. And that's it. That's Spycraft. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked the show, please share it with a friend. If you want to give a review on whatever podcast streaming service that you're using, that would be much appreciated as well. Anything that we can do together to help to spread the word and get the show growing, I would very much appreciate. You guys are awesome. Thank you for listening. Let's go over to the parting thought, and then we'll send you on your way. So I have a ton of respect for the CIA and their work, and the military and their work, and all these different branches, the FBI, right? I have a lot of respect for law enforcement and their efforts at intelligence gathering, but I also am suspicious of the possibility that those are being used against our own citizens. And when I think about that, the more I think about that, the more I think, have the benefits, which have been great, of intelligence gathering and information gathering, do those outweigh the cost associated to lack of or reduction in freedom for individual citizens? In the United States, we are supposed to be the sovereign of this country. Individual citizens are the sovereign of this country. And so, do we deserve to be having lasers shot through our window and having our conversations listened into? I don't know. Right. Obviously, there are dangerous people out there who I would like to have their, terrorist plot or whatever thwarted. But it's really discomforting to me to think that people are that we've empowered government agencies to spy on us. And so as I was thinking about that, and as I was reflecting on it, as I was meditating on it, after the Stoic mode, I turned once again to Marcus Aurelius in his wisdom to think about, honesty and honor and straightforwardness, and the idea that maybe we'd be better served, rather than doing a lot of work in the shadows, whether we'd be better served with taking a more straightforward, straight up approach to life. And maybe that is too blunt of an instrument, and I'm willing to accept that there are difficult cases in the world, and there's much about the world that I don't know, but for me and myself and you and yourself and what you can do and what you can control, I think honesty and honor are the best policy. And here's a quote. It's actually a paired quote from Marcus Aurelius, who again was a Stoic philosopher and emperor of Rome back in ye olden Roman days. He very wise man, and I turn to his readings a lot for, I guess, to try and find wisdom. But what he says here is, quote, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." And I thought this was very impactful, and it made me think. And, spy stuff is cool stuff, and intelligence gathering is great, and lives are saved, no doubt, by the efforts of our, intelligence services. And they've created some incredible technologies that allow them to do some incredible things. But the world, I think, would be better served if the vast majority of people in their day-to-day lives focus on being honest and straightforward and speaking with truthfulness and not trying to deceive and not trying to gain advantage through deception, but simply living honorably and honestly. This has been The Parting Thought. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day. You deserve it.